previous video, we learned how to make one type of dynamic element more accessible, but let's take a look at another scenario. In this video, we're going to analyze some really nice module tabs that were built with MooTools, the JavaScript library, by a fellow named John Plant. These tabs are a very common design pattern, and you've probably seen them on various websites before. They basically consist of 2 or more panels, and only one panel is currently visible. This is useful if you have a lot of content to display, but you don't necessarily want to overwhelm the user by displaying it all at once. As I mentioned in the previous video, almost all screen readers have JavaScript disabled. If we go ahead and click around on these module tabs, you'll notice that the page isn't actually refreshing. These tabs use an asynchronous call to load in the data. This is nice because it decreases the amount of data that needs to load when you first hit the page. But it's not so good from an accessibility standpoint. Basically, no screen reader is going to be able to use something like this. However, these module tabs are much better than average, so there's a pretty clever fallback solution. If JavaScript is disabled, which you can simulate on this page, the module tabs will still load. So let's try it. I've gone ahead and disabled JavaScript here, or at least simulated JavaScript being disabled. When I go ahead and click on the tabs, you can see that it looks like it's still working. Now when I first saw this, I thought there was just something wrong with the demo, but there's actually something very clever going on here. If you watch the address bar up at the top of the browser, you can see that when I click on each tab, the URL changes. That's because when JavaScript is disabled, each tab becomes a link to a different page. However, because everything is in the same place when the page loads, it appears as though the page isn't actually refreshing. This does require a little bit of server-side code to work, and in this case, John is using some PHP for his backend, but it's a clever trick. So let's go ahead and enable JavaScript again. Now, when I hover over these links, you can see down in the status bar at the bottom of the browser that all the URL parameters are still there. In fact, they're always there, but when JavaScript is enabled, it's smart enough to be able to intercept the click and use the parameters for its own script, rather than actually redirecting the browser. So, the previous 2 examples were actually fairly simple, but what about something more complex, like an application built entirely in JavaScript? The World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C for short, is currently drafting a specification called WAI ARIA. The WAI is the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative, and ARIA is part of that. As you can see, ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications. This document basically outlines a new way of building web applications. There are a lot of very abstract layers, but at its core, they're basically trying to formally define things like widgets and drag and drop attributes. They're also doing things like defining application state and so on. In February 2009, the document was published as a last call working draft, but it was pulled because there was so much feedback. Now, as you can imagine, creating a framework for building complex web applications is no simple task, but it's really well worth doing because by actually defining all of these things, you can create a semantic language that's parsable by screen readers. This isn't something that's really ready to use quite yet, but it's something on the horizon to be aware of and to look forward to. Most web applications have more specific needs than the 2 scenarios that were detailed in the previous 2 videos, but the core concepts should remain the same.